Nice and still, folks. 4.
Today on The Big Questions, zero-hour contracts, racism in the church, and shirking dads. Yes, good morning, I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Questions. Today we're live from Goldsmiths, University of London. Welcome everybody to The Big Questions. Now, zero-hour contracts are when you sign up to work for a company, but that employer has no obligation to actually offer you any paid hours. They're common in catering, building, retail, and tourism. Even Buckingham Palace uses them, and many workers like the flexibility, especially students and pensioners who work for that little bit extra. But many can't make ends meet when they have no idea how much money they're going to earn each week. And now refusing a zero-hour contract could lose you state benefits. Are zero-hour contracts ethical? Christian May from the Institute of Directors. Good morning, Christian. Some figures say there are more here than anywhere else. There are more here than ever before. Tell me, is this flexibility or is it exploitation?
It's definitely flexibility. Now, the numbers involved have been up for debate in the last couple of months. Now, the Office for National Statistics, who have done the biggest and most recent analysis of the labour market and zero-hours contracts, have said that there are 1.4 million such contracts in use. Now, that's not to be confused with saying there are 1.4 million people on these contracts, because people will have more than one. Sometimes people have them and they might in fact be dormant. So I think it's important to keep in perspective that we're talking about between 3 and 5% of the overall labour market. And within that, we know, because this is also from the ONS reports, that 65% of people on such arrangements, flexible contracts or non-guaranteed hours contracts, say that they have high job satisfaction. And 60% say that they value the flexibility to such an extent that they would rather not work in different conditions. Now, both of those statistics are actually a little bit higher than when you ask the same question of people in overall general employment. So the flexibility, valuable to businesses and employers, but also not to forget that there are a lot of people whose lifestyle, whose choice, whose circumstances really mean that these contracts suit them down to a T. So I think recognising that flexibility is important, but so is clamping down on fringe areas where they're not being used properly.
Regulating them properly and not making them exclusive. But wouldn't it be better to have a short-term contract? And what about the situation where you're waiting for that phone call, you get the phone call, you get the text, and you can't work? Are you not incredibly paranoid you're going to drop down the priority list?
You've rather sort of hit the nail on the head there, because it's that flexibility of saying, actually, I can't work tomorrow, but I can work all day Saturday.
Will you get the call Saturday?
Well, you can get a call. Now, 80% of people who are on these arrangements have reported that they've never been penalised if they've not been able to take the work offered. And I think that's really important, because one of the issues around this conversation is the way in which it's been hitched to the sort of political and social debate about the nature of the recovery and the nature of employment. And it's often thrown out when people are talking about the economic recovery, and perhaps they don't fully agree with it or like the direction it's going in, and they'll just chuck in zero-hours contracts as another reason why it's not going right. But I think that's simplistic, and I think the Labour Party are tying zero-hours contracts into their sort of campaign narrative, which is fair enough. They're not a million miles away from the government, or indeed the Institute of Directors. We were very active in the government's consultation on this. We don't support the use of exclusivity clauses. We think that they have to be flexible contracts, and if in that contract you're saying you can't work for anybody else at the same time, you're not having any flexibility. So when you get them right, they're incredibly valuable.
Owen Jones.
No one's arguing against flexibility. The problem with zero-hour contracts is they give maximum flexibility to the employer and maximum insecurity to the employees. Now, in other countries, they have ways of actually providing flexibility. For example, in Netherlands and Belgium, they provided means guaranteed in law for employees to be able to negotiate, for example, fewer working hours. The problem with this particular model is the danger is a return to a Victorian age, when dockers would march to the yard in the morning and stick their hands up hoping they'd get work and often go home disappointed. Well, these days, and I often meet young people who get up at 6 a.m. in the morning waiting to get a text message to tell them if they'll get any hours that day. What it means is this. Firstly, the large majority of people in zero-hour contracts are on below the living wage. That's particularly acute in London. It's 3 out of 4. The Office for National Statistics show that those on temporary contracts have far lower levels of well-being than those on permanent contracts.
I think that's simply not the case.
Well, it is the case, and let me finish. The other point, there's a few other points, but quickly, is that you can be on
We'll
call.
come to those, yeah.
On call all day, for example, from 9 a.m. in the morning till last thing at night, when you've only got 20 hours, set hours, for example, that week, you have an exclusivity clause. You can't work for other employers during that same period. It's very hard to claim in work benefits, and it's got to be seen as part of a general trend of stripping security from the workplace. We've seen the growth of so-called self-employment. It's often self-unemployment. It happened to my dad. He became self-employed. But many of those people are on very low wages, not getting many hours. You don't have pension rights. You don't have leave rights for leave. You don't get redundancy pay.
So it's trampling on workers' rights.
So let's have flexibility, but not at the expense of security of working people, and that's the problem we've got.
We do much more of this than Europe, of course. Christian, come back on that. I know you want to.
Yeah, we know that 80% of people on these arrangements report they've never been sanctioned if they've not been able to take the work offered. We know, because this is the same report that we're referring to, that 60% of people value the work-life balance they have, whereas if you ask people across general employment, that number slips to 58%. So it's a fraction, but it's important, I think, if we're talking about this simply as if these contracts are a symptom of a Dickensian or a cruel workforce. It's simply not the case. There is flexibility in the workforce because demographics mean that the workforce is changing, social, technological changes mean the workforce is changing. So let's use an absolute example here, because I'll say one circumstance, and there can be two scenarios for the explanation. So if you say that more old people, recently retired people, younger people, if they're going back into work, they're looking for more flexible work. Now, you could say that's a symptom of people taking more ownership of their labour and that they're responding to a change in the workforce and that people can have more than one job and be flexible. Or you could say that's a symptom of an insecure environment and a fragile workforce. Now, I think the truth is it's probably somewhere between the two right now.
Christian, firstly, often you can't get more than one job because of exclusivity clauses.
Well, they're used in the most tiny percentage of instances, though. I mean, we're against the use of them full stop.
9%, apparently.
9%. They're very rarely used.
Will, hang on. Will, you run a company.
Reasons.
Will, you run a company, managing director of aspect.co.uk. There you are. And how useful are these for you?
Yeah, we've got about 200 engineers that are travelling around London sort of fixing electric.
So it's refurbishment,
refurbishment. And we use them for our engineers, and they suit us and they suit the engineers.
Why do they suit the engineers?
Well, because they don't... they may plan this around either looking after kids during the day, so some of them will want to work different schedules, so we will meet with them at the beginning of the month and we'll work out the kind of times that they want to work during that month, and then we'll map that out and we'll work that in with our schedule, so it kind of suits both sides. But I do think if you take it to an extreme and you say, you know, there's exclusivity clauses and there's no protections, then yes, certainly 0 hours contracts shouldn't be handled that way.
But when is there a concern? Do they have a concern if they can't do the work on that particular day? I mean, would that would be worrying if you were one of the engineers? I can't do it on that, because somebody else would then.
But we're not dealing with it. You're not getting a text message, you know, an hour before you're supposed to turn up for work. This is planned a month in advance. It just means that we have the flexibility to try and look at sort of weather cycles and how busy we might be, so we can plan our labour force.
There's refurbishment.
You know, if it works for them, it works for us.
So it's a month ahead. Can you give them a guarantee of the amount of money, the amount of work they will get?
We wouldn't have anyone that's earning less hours than they want to achieve. So actually, these guys, I mean, they're on better rates than they would be if they weren't on 0 hours contracts, because the flexibility gives a value to us. So.
But Nikki, if I'm
Catherine, yeah, please, yeah.
So the word flexibility has been used a lot, but my question would be flexibility for who? You know, these contracts have been around for a long time, for many years, and in some circumstances they work very well. The problem for me is where they become the norm rather than the exception. And at Movement for Change, which is the organisation I run, we work with people who are on these contracts to help them to organise, to negotiate better rates for themselves, particularly at universities where they're being used, because what we're seeing is increasingly they're being relied on as the norm, that they don't provide security, for example, to plan childcare.
So there's mission creep here. They're becoming the norm, you reckon?
Yeah, well, they were originally designed to be used as a stopgap, for example, to retain employees when you were in difficulty
But
as
for
a company.
students, and you mentioned students, isn't it perhaps a good way to get extra money to help finance your education even?
Well, if you get the hours. And that's the key point. It's a relationship of power. For me, if we look at this as an ethical question, an employment relationship is just that. It's a relationship based on reciprocity. I give you my labour, in return you give me work and I'm paid for what I do. Zero-hours contracts, if used or abused in particular ways, break down that reciprocity, that relationship, and leave people vulnerable, open to abuse, and in situations where they don't know where their income is coming from week on week.
But I think that's just trying to make sure that employers can't abuse them, isn't it? So a zero-hours contract has a place in the market. It's just that there need to be the controls in place so people can't abuse that contract.
Absolutely, and the exclusivity issue, which is what a lot of people focus on when they talk about these things as a sort of great social ill. You know, at the Institute of Directors, we've got nearly 40,000 members who represent small, medium business, and we asked 1,000 of them, do you use zero-hours contracts? And 10% of them said yes, and they use them for 10% or less for their own work.
But if it works for so many businesses, isn't there a danger that employees who are on the job role will be worried that they may no longer be on the job role? They might be moved ultimately to a zero-hours contract because it's working for so many companies.
I think it goes the other way around, actually. People tend to move from zero-hours contracts into a full-time role.
Oh, so it gives them experience, they can get up the ladder.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
I think that student contracts are very useful for students, particularly for students, because, I mean, the flexibility allows them to work round the exam schedule, and also for working parents also. They can work around looking after their kids, and I think, yeah, it's basically...
Catherine, the childcare point. Pam, in a minute.
Nothing there that you've mentioned couldn't be achieved by other forms of more traditional contracts, which would guarantee annual leave rights, sick pay rights,
It's better than
other
no
things
job
which
for
are...
students, because I know a lot of my student friends wouldn't have jobs without zero-hour contracts. They wouldn't be employed.
That's not true. No.
So
You
it's
can
better than
have,
no job.
as Catherine says, you can have flexible working arrangements without this model. And just quickly on that, just on your point, Christian, nearly half of all people on zero-hour contracts have been on them for more than 2 years. They're not a stepping stone. And the other point
It can be a
But that
stepping
might be because it suits them.
It might well be
Well,
because
it's-
it's,
Well, we don't
they're
know.
on-
We'd have to look down on those figures, but I'm saying they're not a stepping stone necessarily. But the other key point is this. The Confederation of British Industry, the voice of bosses in this country, a few years ago they published a report calling for a flexi-force. Now, what that means is an ever smaller permanent workforce, depending on this kind of more transient workforce. That means stripping people of pension rights, redundancy pay, maternity leave, all
I
of
don't know
those
who's in
things.
favour of
And that is what
and
workers
it's
need
not
to be
part
aware
of
of.
the debate around flexible zero-hour contracts.
Let's
which
go
are
to the
just
audience.
really useful.
Let's have a flexible debate. And we had some hands up here. Good morning. How are you doing?
Morning, hi.
What's your point?
My point is, it's good that we were talking about the 0 hours, but what are we talking about? Minimum wage or public sector? For example, I'm a nurse, and we have an agency nurse, and we always shortage staff, and they come in with a list of, I don't do this, I don't do this, I don't do that. But at the end of the day, they get paid more than me, double than me. And if we look at the other side of minimum wage, family who depending on this kind of work, they might just think, okay, I don't have a work today, but tomorrow I might work on minimum wage. That doesn't support the family. So we're talking about the Bay and the public sector, you know, with private.
Yeah, and a gentleman back there, right the other side. Yeah, that's you. Yeah.
I think the main problem with it is that there's not a lot of security with the job, really. That's the way it is. If you could offer more security with it, then it could be a bit better. But until that, then the problem is going to be as it is.
Pam. Pam has picked up the baton.
And I'm not even here for this part of the debate.
You're here for it all.
But the 80% statistic that you say that people feel they haven't been penalised when they have refused an offer of work. I know a restaurant owner who once said to me something like, oh, they've just slipped down the list because they couldn't come in.
Well, maybe they're
And-
in
that's the
And
point I
I'm
was trying to
just
make earlier
saying,
on.
you know,
Yeah,
exactly, and you know, you don't know that. I would not trust that 80%.
Well, I do, because there's the Office of National Statistics who have asked and done this,
But
this
they don't, that
detailed
person doesn't
survey.
Cole
know.
Morton.
They'll slip down
That's
the
hundreds
list.
of thousands of words.
Wait. Cole Morton has entered the fray.
Morning. Your statistic is telling us, Christian, that 1 in 5 people have been penalised for turning down work. I don't think that's acceptable, do you?
No, I don't. And I'm talking about the fringe issues of where these contracts are abused versus the massive bulk of the instances in which they are of extreme value.
Your other statistic also said that nearly 1 in 10 are on exclusive contract.
And I'll tell you why. So there are a very small number, about 16 out of 1,000 people in our membership who we are, said they use exclusivity clauses. And that's because, just in one example, it might be someone of great technical skill, because these are used in their professions, they're used in technical skills, they're used to protect intellectual property, training purposes.
Yes,
It's
and
not
they're-
always just used down in low-skilled or low-paid
And they're also
sectors.
used by employers to avoid the obligations to help people with families and who need flexible working that legislation brought in recently has made employers have to face. These are a way round that.
Well,
yes.
What do you mean, well? You just said,
what I
well.
mean
Oh,
is-
well, that's okay.
No,
then.
what I mean is we don't support instances where they're used in place of full-time, long-term employment. We don't support that. We're very
And I
vocal.
assume you'd be against exclusivity clauses in contracts.
With the exception of the instances that I've just referred to. So we think there should be a role for exclusivity clauses only when they can be justified for very particular reasons.
I'll tell you what I
in
don't
high skills
understand.
or the
I'll
professions.
tell you what I don't understand. You can understand, Will having this, but the nature of his business and it's weather dependent because of the refurbishment, getting outside, getting that conservatory fixed or whatever. But what about, the high street stores we've been hearing about? What about, McDonald's and what a Subway and Pizza Hut? Surely they know how many people they are going to need.
Yeah, well, I would not defend that practice. You'd have to get them in here to do so. But I think that there are companies such
that
as...
shows the extent of
such
it.
as, take Hertz Car Hire, for example. Now,
Yeah.
now they say that 20% of people who they employ on zero-hours contracts move into full-time roles, and they also say that everybody they employ on a zero-hours contract is satisfied. So I think it's just important not to reduce this to
Yeah.
a sort of pantomime villain of the economic debate.
And the point I'm sure many people will appreciate at home is that if an elderly person or a person who is retired keeps one foot in the door, that's good for them. It can be good for the company. It can be good for people who need that flexibility. Do you need that flexibility? Just you?
Yeah, me. I was just going to say it can't really be generalised, because what about like single-parent families and people who kind of rely on these hours? If they just are told, oh no, we haven't got any hours for you today, how are they going to feed their family and support their family? It's okay for students, but it's not really very generalised.
Cole, do you think we need to make sure that there are proper regulations in place here, minimum hours and certain workplace rights? And,
I think we moved towards the situation where employers had an obligation to work with their employees to make it mutually satisfying. And I think this habit moves away from that. It allows them to slip out of that. When I was growing up, 70s and 80s, people were always saying, oh, there's too much power in the workforce, the unions are too powerful. It's gone completely the opposite way. We've shifted the balance completely.
I think Cole's point is a good one, because it's the government's role, in my view, to set a standard for basic employment rights. And we're talking about rights here. And where you have situations, for example, zero-hours contracts that lapse for a period of weeks, interrupt the employment relationship, break people's rights to annual leave, sick pay.
They have a place in today's labour market, according to Vince Cable. And of course, we are competing in a global market with countries where there are no rights whatsoever.
Yeah.
Do we need to cut our cloth accordingly?
Well, I think if we go down that line, then it's a race to the bottom.
Exactly. Well, it is the race to the bottom argument, and we've already seen the impact of that, because at the moment we live in a country, for example, where most people in poverty are in work. They get up in the morning and they earn their poverty. That costs the taxpayer huge amounts of money, because we spend all this money on in-work benefits. It sucks demand out the economy, because people can't spend and people depend on cheap credit. Zero hours are part of that, because their wages are far lower than most other workers. They don't have security week after week. And the problem is, as I say, is we're stripping from the workforce pension rights. We're stripping paid leave. We're stripping sick days. We should be arguing for a race to the top to improve and extend workers' rights in this country and improve their pay, not to drag everyone to the bottom as we are at the moment.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts on that. And you can react on Twitter, as I'm sure people will. If you've got something to say about that, you log on to bbc.co.uk/the big questions. Follow the link to where you can join the discussion online, and also, of course, social media. We're debating live this morning from Goldsmiths University. Also, is the Church of England institutionally racist? And are fathers doing their fair share? So get tweeting or emailing on those topics, and send us any other ideas or thoughts you may have about the show. Love your neighbour as yourself, arguably the greatest commandment given to us by Jesus, and possibly the hardest to keep. So is it especially shocking when the Church of England has to acknowledge there's still racism in its midst, something they first acknowledged in 1987? Well, this week the House of Bishops announced it's working on a plan to double the number of minority ethnic clergy in senior positions over the next decade. Now, there are currently fewer than 5. Is the Church of England institutionally racist? Lay member of the Synod, Alison Ruoff, is there a big problem here?
No.
Is that the debate over about it?
Yeah, that's
or do we
right.
need to, do we need to carry on our discussion?
End of story.
There isn't a problem.
No, I don't think there is a problem. I think it's blown out of all proportion. I actually think that every church, no, I correct that, not every church is as welcoming perhaps as they should be, but most churches are. And people...
but yours is the state church. It's the established church.
Well, what's that got to do with it?
Is it, well, I'll tell you, because is it properly reflecting modern society, given that there was a survey out this week, by about 2050, 1/3 of this country are not going to be white. So you have to do something about it. You have to move with the times. Otherwise, the Church of England will surely become irrelevant.
The Church of England won't become irrelevant as far as I can see. It might divide at some point over various issues, but it's not irrelevant. It's really important. As at the moment, because it's the established church, therefore there's the opportunity for the Christian message to go to every house in every parish. Whether it does or not is another matter. But I do think that we work ourselves up into a frenzy about this institutional racism. If you go to a church in a village, say in the depths of Devon or Norfolk, you might not see any people of an ethnic minority because simply they don't live there. If you go to a church in central London, you'll probably see a lot of people of all sorts of ethnic minorities all worshipping together and all getting on very well.
We could walk out the door here at Goldsmiths.
Indeed.
Here, but there'd be 5 within walking distance, within a stone's throw almost, 5 Pentecostal churches that are full to the brim on a Sunday
and that's
morning.
Wonderful.
Sorry?
That's wonderful. But people like to be with their own, and I think we have to remember that. They do. You know, well, for example, if you all come from France, if you've got lots of French neighbours, will you tend to go and be with your French neighbours?
I thought the point of the church was that everyone was welcome.
But it is true. Well, why do people, if you're in central London, in Oxford Circus, say, you hear everybody speaking their own language in their groups. They don't all suddenly start speaking English, unless they have to.
Cole?
I think we need to make a very strong demarcation here between the experience in churches that Alison is talking about, wherever they may be, whatever parish they may be, they're all very different, and the experience of the church, the institution of the church. Alison will know full well that in 1985, when Faith in the City report came out, one of the things that was hidden away in that, but was still a very clear message to the Church of England was, there is an ongoing massive incoming of people from the Caribbean, from Africa and Asia, and those people are Christians and they're believers, and unless you are welcoming and open to them, you will not actually engage with them. That's what has happened. The Church of England has not engaged with them. The Pentecostal church is growing enormously in London, not just because people want to flock together, as you put it, Alison, but because in many cases, when they came, they were not welcome in their local church.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that in my own experiences, for instance, my parents, like my mother, they were not welcomed in Anglican churches, so they had to splinter off and create their own churches.
Can I ask you, what did that not welcomed in Anglican churches
Well,
how did it manifest itself?
Well, I even remember as a kid when we used to go to church, it was just staid and dry and dead and boring when we used to go to the ordinary church. It was just, the preacher says something, people like the performing seals, they'll clap every now. There was no interaction. In anthropology,
no joy.
we call it. There was no joy, there was no spirit. You couldn't really be emotive. My mother always says that if you go to church and the preacher doesn't move you with the word, he's not doing his job.
Although, to be fair, there is joy and pleasure in the Anglican church all over the place.
Of course there is.
You just got the wrong one.
Maybe, Alison,
or maybe as a child I was experienced continuously
there is that
exposed
perception,
to the
it's a
wrong
bit staid. Maybe you should go to one of these services and let your hair down.
I haven't got long enough hair.
You could let it down, whatever you got. Feel the spirit, feel that way.
It's not a question of style, Nicky.
John Root.
I think the point is, Alison says people like to be with their own. And, you see that in all sorts of ways. You have to say, is that Christianity? Because the Christian faith has a very powerful vision of people of every nation and tribe and language gathering together in worship. And the failure of the Church of England is that's not exhibited with sufficient enthusiasm, energy, vigour, because plans aren't made to make it that way. It's institutional racism.
So there needs to be a conscious effort. Owen, you want to come in, and we'll hear from the audience too. And Alison in a minute.
Sorry. Alison, your point's just not true. I mean, we live in this hugely diverse city, for example, London. In Britain, we have some of the highest levels of mixed-race relationships on the face of the earth. People in this city in particular, and elsewhere, They live together, they work together, they even sleep together in some cases. They're setting up families, they're living together. And I have to say, if the church is going to die, it will be because of people like you. Because 1 in 7 people now only go to a religious service. It's not representative.
Let me ask you a question. Do you go to church?
No, I don't go to church.
Right, so how do you know? Come on.
How do you know? I'll turn that on its head. Why are so few people of my generation going to churches? And I would suggest it's because it's seen as completely out of date to so
Alison Ruoff.
My daughter...
Alison Ruoff and Owen Jones. It's a dream ticket, ladies and gentlemen. Alison Ruoff.
My daughter goes to a church that's not an Anglican church. She goes to Hillsong from Australia. And on Easter Sunday, they had 10,000 young people going to church. On Good Friday, they had 450 young people baptised. Now, you can't tell me Christianity's dead in this country.
I didn't say it was dead. I said, people like you will ensure that it won't be relevant.
I'm sorry, but I believe that young people are most welcome in the Church of England and in any church. It doesn't have to be the Church of England. I
want to establish something.
I just want to know that everybody who goes to church can hear the good news of Jesus Christ. Yes. That's what I care about.
In whatever way they hear it. 1 second. John Root.
What's best for them?
Let's get back to it. Is the Church of England institutionally racist?
Yeah, because I think institutional racism isn't just being unkind, nasty to people. You know, we often have quite a simplified view of what racism is.
It's more subtle.
It's much more subtle, yeah. And it's the way the institution chooses to operate. And institutions tend to operate in the way that those who lead are comfortable with. And that's different from the way that ordinary people, most ordinary white people, but certainly ordinary black people as well feel. And therefore, there's that sort of exclusion, which in a sense Les was indicating when he said it's boring and so on. Because that's not just black people who think that, white people think that as well. Yeah. You know, so it needs to be an intentional desire to change the way we operate, that it does actually facilitate and develop the gifts that black people bring.
How do we get a situation facilitated, Andrew, in just 1 second, whereby there are more, not just Johnson Tamu and a few others, but there are more black leaders in the Church of England? How do we get there, Les?
Well, for me, first of all, you know, we have to have the right conversation. You know, every historical cause has a contemporary consequence. We know that the Church of England, the Anglican Church, whatever, all of them were involved in African chattel enslavement. All of them. I think only the Quakers weren't involved in that.
It's a long time ago, though.
It doesn't matter if it's a long time ago, because how you have to think about it is, think about it in this way. If you're a black person and you're in this congregation and it's more or less an all-white congregation, you're in there. Or it could be an all-black congregation with a white vicar, priest or whatever. And you cannot see yourself in that position because, one, continuously reinforced through the images, God is white, Jesus is white. You can never aspire to be God. You can never aspire to be Jesus. You can walk in Jesus' footsteps, but can you be like him? These things cause dissonance because you don't see yourself represented in that picture. Then would you be surprised that those people are cowed and don't put themselves forward for these higher positions? Because if they're getting treated like that as members of the congregation, what is that going to be like if they get to those higher echelons?
And Alison, I know you want to come back. And audience in a second, and Andrew too. Yeah.
The thing is, Les, the majority of Anglicans in the world are black.
That's right.
The majority are in Africa, actually. And the Church of England needs to learn from that and engage with that, and has a problem with engaging that, particularly over the issue of same-sex marriage at the moment. But I think we have to be really clear. I go to church, Alison. I go to lots of churches, actually. And I see lots of churches where there are people of mixed race and people of different colours and people of different backgrounds. And they're fantastic. But the issue here is institutional racism, and that is not reflected in the House of Bishops or the leadership of the Church, and that is an anomaly and a disgrace.
Reverend Andrew Symes.
Yes, I mean, it's a very serious charge if people are saying there's institutional racism, because as has been mentioned already, part of the Christian gospel is that it's for everybody, that it's not for, you know, it's available for everyone of whatever culture. And I think perhaps we need to ask, is there something in the culture of the Church of England, particularly the leadership of the Church of England, which, you know, it's not that people are deliberately excluding other people, it's just there's something in the culture which is not attractive. And I think what's been said is that...
it could be a self-perpetuating elite.
Well, it could be, exactly. And I think that's true with a lot of organisations, not just the Church. And so I think this process of asking the question...
all organisations would strive to be immune from that?
Yeah, but I think as has already been mentioned, there are churches which are packed with people of all sorts of different races, and the question perhaps is to ask them, especially churches, black majority churches, let's say, where people are praising the Lord, they are confident in themselves, confident in the gospel, in their mission to their particular community. Ask them, what is it about the Church of England that doesn't attract you, which is what Les was saying. It may be to do with style of worship.
But you
30
see,
years too late because we have...
No, you see, to me, it's not too late, because we were having a discussion upstairs, and one of the things we said was, in 2007, great inroads were made, maybe for the wrong reason, when it was a so-called 200 years since the abolition of the slave trade. But I know I was invited into more churches and mosques during that year than I ever have been in my life to have these kind of conversations. At the time, I just published a book called Whiteness Made Simple. And in that book, I spoke about being raised as a Judeo-Christian child and how that affected and impacted me when I started to look at, on one hand, we're encouraged to praise the Lord, you know, everybody is welcome in the house of the Lord. But the Lord didn't look like us. And if you speak to black people, on his point, if you speak to black people and you say to a lot of them, and if they're honest, and you say to them, how do you feel about a white Jesus? How would you feel about replacing it with a black Jesus? They will invariably say, God doesn't have no colour. Jesus doesn't have a colour.
Jesus wasn't white.
Rather than to confront the history.
In Palestine.
No, but you're missing my point. The point is that is the image, the Warner Salmon images that have been ingrained in everyone's consciousness.
That's the image of this particular culture. Hands up on that point. Hands up on that. Alison, I will be with you. Two gentlemen there at the back in the cream jacket. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm an atheist, and I'm also from an organisation called the London Black Atheists, and the answer is simple. When you look at the character of religion in contemporary society today, you see that more often than not, contained within today's religion is misogyny, sexism, racism. When you look at all the Quran,
do you think that, look, talking about the Church of England specifically, do you feel from your experience and what people have told you, from what you've heard, that those things are part of attitudes within the Church of England?
Yes, it is. I mean, they were responsible for partaking in the slavery. It's very...
Come down, and it's further along. Yeah, what's your point?
Yeah, I'm also from London Black Atheists.
They're all sitting together. That's,
yes,
you see, you're right, Alison. People like to stick together. Go on.
All religions are basically institutionally racist because
they're not.
The moment you have a religion, you have an in-group and an out-group, and therefore you have your chosen people or whatever it is. They're institutionally racist.
Right, got your point. Are you from? Can I talk? Are you from the Black Atheists?
I'm not.
Oh, right.
I'm not. I was actually baptized in the Church of England.
Right. Okay. Right.
But then later on, I actually changed my mind not to actually be with the Church of England. There are key things.
Where do you worship now? May I?
Now I actually worship with the Catholic Church.
Right.
Which again, I know they have quite a lot of issues also going with them. But I would say that Church of England is actually kind of like disconnect itself from the African fellowship. So most of the issue that the Africans have in the church are always not listened to.
Well,
and the Africans...
Equal marriage and so forth? And
yes.
Yeah, okay, right.
They do have some strong views in there, but the thing is, they feel that the church is unwilling to listen to any of their views.
Alison Ruoff, that's interesting, this paradox about the massive power of the Anglican Church and popularity in Africa. But on the point about, what Les has raised about the feeling of being excluded and the historical reasons of slave trade, what's your response to that?
Well, I wasn't around in the middle of the slave trade. I have to
nor
say.
was I. Well, at least I hope I weren't.
But you know, we've moved a long way since perhaps the time when your parents came to this country, and I think in the 60s we didn't do it all well at welcoming people particularly from the Caribbean nations, and I apologise for that. But we have learned a lot, and I go to a church which is in a white middle-class area. And our congregation is composed of all sorts of people and all sorts of colours, Asians, black people, all sorts. And we get on really well. Having said that, we haven't, I think we've only got one person of an ethnic minority on the PCC.
Yeah, that's the problem,
Now,
isn't it?
Well, we've had Asian people on the PCC, but they won't stand, or they don't want to stand.
Why not?
Well, they don't want the responsibility, they want to do other things, and so on.
You see,
And
this is...
hang
You see,
on
this
a
is...
minute.
This,
It's not always easy to get people to do these particular jobs. I would love more people to come and
Why
do
don't
that.
they want the responsibility?
I've no idea, but
this is the
white
kind of
people are, not,
conversation
are
I'm saying...
just the same.
But this is the kind of conversation I'm saying that perhaps you should have.
We do have it. We try and persuade
because
people,
what I'm saying is, if you
please
can,
come and join us.
But if you
and
can
they say,
kind of
no,
go
I
to
don't
the,
want to.
if you can kind of go to the default that they don't want to accept the responsibility, that's like when they used to say, oh, black youth in England don't want to work because they used to smoke weed all the time, or they're getting high, and all this kind of crazy stuff. At the end of the day, what you need is a clear conversation.
We do have conversations.
I run courses with a group called Black History Studies where we interrogate these things, and every time I run this course, I'll have Christians in there, black, maybe white, and they will say, we do not have this quality of debate or discussion. So people just dismiss the fact that there isn't representation because people don't want to be responsible.
Now,
That's not what it's about.
There was a famous sociologist who said that my position is my possession.
Richard Sennett, yeah,
Yeah, oh, that's the
exactly.
guy. Yeah, my position is my possession. Is that the problem? Is the problem, John Root, in the pews, or is it in the hierarchy, the purple shirts?
Yeah, it's in the nation, in a sense, because, I think we terrify the phrase institutional racism or the phrase racism, but it's endemic because it's a generalised attitude amongst white people of superiority, of not expecting much from black people.
Oh,
And
no.
if you actually listen closely to black people in the Church of England, there's this sense of not being affirmed, of not being welcomed, not in a very overt way at all. But in quite a subtle way.
And carry on, John. I want to come to the lady there in a second, if you don't mind.
So people I know who are training for ministry, for example, they wouldn't say people are racist in the sense you're told to go away or you're not welcome. But there's a lack of interest, a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of readiness to learn, which actually inhibits people. So that it's in the pews. It's ordinary white people actually not having that zest to learn, to develop, to say, what do these people bring to the table?
Yes, lady there. You're married to a clergyman, aren't you?
Yes, I
Which
am.
clergyman are you married to?
To John Root.
To him?
Yes.
So what's your... I know we had a conversation earlier and you said, I'm not sure if I want to speak.
Yes.
I'm glad you do want to speak. What's your experience been? Have you felt any sort of hostility over the years?
Yes, I will say I did feel hostility, and I would not say that it came from everyone, but it does exist, and it actually, in order to foster, you actually need to get to the other person's side. Like when Alison said that, I don't know why they don't want to take responsibility, that just shows that you don't really understand why they have, why did you get that impression? I think that needs to be. So I think it's very important that we need to listen and actually to affirm. And in order to affirm, you need to recognize the gifts that we, as an ethnic minority, I have gifts. We all have gifts, and we want to use it.
Beautiful.
It is a problem in society as a whole, though, Nick. I mean, look at this panel. We're in London, and all of us, apart from one, are white. Look at the lack of black MPs. Look at the lack of black journalists.
Well, we have
this
a
is a
black
problem all of
archbishop.
us have to deal with, but it's a very small minority, so it's a central problem.
There are only two
with race.
archbishops, and one is white and one is black.
No, but if
That's
you look at
quite
the clergy,
But after that, there's none.
No,
and John Sentama was raised
we also
overseas.
have-
Hang on. So we've not actually developed black British ministers, clergy, senior
But
leaders.
look at the
any level.
numbers. The number of black people compared with white people in terms of the whole of the nation. There aren't that many in percentage.
It's not about numbers, is it? It's about institutional racism. And for me, a telling point in what you said was, I don't know why they don't want to get involved. One thing, as has been said, is to go and talk to people.
Of course we talk to people.
But the other thing is that we need to all be open, whether it's in a sexist context, a racist context, whatever context we're talking about it in. We need to be prepared to change and move our institutions to change the way that they operate. So it's not about saying, why don't you want to take a role in my institution as it is? It's about saying, what is it about this institution that we all need to change?
This is a church. And this is a church.
This
is a church whereby everybody is welcome. It doesn't matter who they are, what colour or anything. They're welcome.
A last word, Andrew.
Yeah, I think there is problem generally in society, as was mentioned here, also about participation in volunteerism.
That's right.
I think that's probably a case in many institutions. And so I think there is a challenge to the church in terms of its welcome. There's a constant challenge for that. There's a constant challenge in terms of persuading people of all different types. I mean, you could talk about white working class men or any other group in order to encourage people who perhaps don't feel that, you know, as you say, they look at the thing and they say that that's not me. There is a challenge for that in encouraging participation, and that's true for the church, but it's true for all other voluntary organisations.
Thank you all so much indeed. Thank you for that. And thoughts will come in. And you can join in all this morning's debates. Log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions and follow the link to the online discussion. And, of course, you can tweet using the hashtag BBCTBQ. And tell us what you think about our last big question, too. Are fathers doing their fair share? Now, if you'd also like to be in the audience at a future show, you can email audience@menton.tv. And we're looking for audiences for Walsall on May the 25th and Brighton on June the 15th. Next week, we're back here at Goldsmiths with a special Big Questions asking, did the First World War change Britain for the better? Brigadier Sir Hugh Struan, Jeremy Paxman, Professor David Stevenson and Frank Ledwidge are amongst those taking part, so do join us. Finland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland and Denmark are the best 5 countries in the world to be a mother, according to a Save the Children survey this week. The UK came 26th, equal with Belarus, down 3 places from last year. Perhaps one factor is, although mothers are now the main breadwinners in a third of British couples with children, they still do most of the housework, cooking and caring. Are fathers doing their fair share? Dr. Pam Spur, lifestyle coach. Was it 26th, equal with Belarus? That's even worse than last night in the Eurovision Song Contest. It's not great, is it?
I'm not surprised at all, because men are not pulling their weight. The Institute of Public Policy did a large study in 2012 which found that 8 out of 10 married women still do the majority of the housework, and that over the last few decades we just haven't seen this change. Now, Nikki, one of the 3 top reasons why people divorce is neglect, feeling neglected, feeling lack of respect, because it's not the big things that break a couple up, like, oh, which city should we live in? Because people realize as a couple, well, yeah, I can see their point of view on a big issue. It's the little things, when a man won't help lay the table, won't pick up after the kids, won't, you know, do a washing. Those are the things that erode relationships and damage them.
Rebecca, come in here, because you've written a book which is, that's why you're here,
Yep.
Shattered, Modern Motherhood and the Illusion of Equality. There is some, perhaps some would say, very old-fashioned attitudes that persist. Hello, honey, I'm home. A woman's work is never done.
Yep.
All that stuff. How much is it cultural?
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing is a lot of it's cultural, but it's absolutely linked to the supporting structures and the legislation in a country. And I think it's no accident that the countries that come out top in that Save the Children research in terms of having a good environment for mothers are exactly the same countries that encourage fathers to do as much as possible. So these are countries that that lay down very firm cultural expectations that fathers will play their fair share in the household. They're the countries that have that do as much as possible to bring fathers in the early days of childcare, so they have shared parental leave. And so
Hard
on.
habits to break in this country. No?
Hard habits to break, and it takes determination and focus and actually a bit of a stick as well as a carrot to get fathers involved. So what those countries have is they have a long length of ring-fence paternity leave for fathers, so that it's use it or lose it. Fathers either take that paternity leave or it completely falls away. The mother can't take it up. And it forces fathers, in just the same way that mothers are forced, to come to terms with childcare.
It's funny that's seen as a stick, isn't it?
Well, you know, it's a carrot and it's a stick. And, you know, parenthood is learnt on the job, and you have to take a deep breath and you get in there, and it's really, really hard, and it's really, really rewarding, and it's sort of, you know, it's two sides of the same coin. And I'm sure that the mothers and fathers in this room would agree with that, but you've got to get in there in the first place.
Well, and we are in 2014, and we still do not have pay parity between men and women. So outside of the home, we are so lackadaisical about the 15.7% difference that women earn outside the home. We still have the pervasive attitude within the home that women are still going to get along and just do the things.
We do have pay parity.
We do not. Office of
we
National
do.
Statistics.
This is how we have pay parity. In our 20s and 30s, men and women get paid the same. We don't have a gender pay gap. We have a parenting pay gap. The pay gap only kicks in when we start to force mothers to be the main carer and force fathers to be the main earner. You only have to look at the countries at the top of the list where the roles are shared more equally. Fathers have equal rights. We've given women equal rights in the workplace, equal opportunities going to work. We have not given fathers an equal right to take on the role of being the carer. Unless you get equal, it's the two sides of the same coin. Unless you give equal rights to fathers as well as equal rights to mothers, as has happened more in the Scandinavian countries, nothing will change.
I've got
what
to
rights
say,
do you want?
No disparity is
What rights do you want fathers to have?
There are three key rights. First, when a child is born, mothers are given parental rights, but fathers aren't. I think that's wrong. I think both mothers and fathers should have rights from the moment
What do you mean by that?
There's a right called it's called parental responsibility, but it's the right to make decisions about health, about the religion of your child, and so on and so forth. It's automatically given to all mothers. It is not given to all fathers.
And
there's only two ways.
married couples.
There's only two ways that a father can automatically get it. One is by being granted it by the mother when she marries him. The other is being granted it by the state when the state gives us. That's the first thing.
Right.
We're treated differently because of our sex.
Okay.
The second thing is then all the support the state puts in terms of child benefits and other kind of supports goes directly to the mother, not the father. And that says basically, mother, you're the primary carer. And the third key thing is in terms of parental leave rights. The last Labour government introduced the most unequal parental leave rights in the world. They made them mothers' rights, not parents' rights. So a couple, when they sit down and make the choice about who's going to actually take on the responsibility of bringing up this child, they're forced into making certain decisions, unless there's a massive income disparity between the mother and the father. My daughter's 16 now. I was at home for the first 3 years of her life. It was easier to make that decision back in the last century, in 1997, than it would be now, because actual parental rights were a lot more equal back in the 90s, but they were less generous.
You've got to say, though, men can see beyond, even if a man has fewer rights, as you're saying, and quite rightly, we need to look at that. Men can see beyond that. And when they come home, and if both partners are working, or if mum is at home as a mother, men can come home and still help out. They have the intelligence to see past the fact that perhaps they don't have that right.
Is that not happening?
No, it is not happening. As I said, 8 out of 10 women do
It's
more.
also the case, though, that even in heterosexual households where there are no children, women do 2/3 of the housework.
Do they really?
They do, and that's right
He
across
said,
the Western
looking
world.
surprised.
It's also the case that as women earn more, once they start to earn more than the man, they actually take on more housework. So you can sort of do less as you earn more, but as soon as you overtake him, then you end up doing more housework and more childcare than he does, which is a sort of interesting anomaly.
Isn't it? Yeah.
The other thing that we need to be really aware of is that men and women have different views about what's fair. So that women tend to see fairness in terms of doing equal amounts.
Yes.
So that you know, there's a certain amount of work being done. Some of it's paid work, some of it's work with the children. And the women will see hours put in equal terms as fairness. What men tend to feel is that they can buy themselves out of childcare by earning more. And so they will come in and they will come home and they won't muck in necessarily because they feel that their fair contribution comes from higher earnings. And so we've got a whole lot of very complex things going on about how we think about fairness, which do not match.
Okay.
And absolutely, because they undervalue that the mother, who maybe is at home at that point, is not doing as much work. which is
But
absolutely
sometimes
not
when
the
men
case.
do a little bit of housework and are praised for it, they're kind of canonised.
Oh,
you know?
yeah, and which is why I will not say about the good men who are doing their share.
Thank you.
They are
Right,
the
Alison.
good women who are doing their share anyway.
Alison,
Exactly, I wouldn't call them the good
Liz,
men.
I promise you.
They're not exceptional. That's what they should be doing.
Yeah, the norm. Yeah, the default position. Alison, you're worried about men being emasculated, aren't you? What do you mean?
Well, I am, because I think sometimes we tend to sort of think that men are just sort of pushed aside because of these very strong women. But actually, in my own family, I see my son doing a huge amount of childcare and all sorts of things. I mean, if there's a nappy to be changed, then he'll go and do it with that. Never gives the second thought to it. And I didn't see my husband doing quite that. So I think over 20, 30, 40 years, we've moved a long way in more and more men doing things. But we mustn't go so far as to push men into feeling that they are less important, less valuable, less worth than women.
Why would they feel that? Why would a man who is changing his child's nappy feel that that act is somehow making him less of a man or less valuable to the project of raising that child? I don't see why you would consider that to be a threat to masculinity, to be more involved.
I think we are in danger of women being so forceful today in saying, this is what you're going to do.
Where is this danger? Where is this danger?
Okay.
It's sitting on the front row.
These are fathers over here. They're the ones who are asking to be involved. They want to be involved. It's not women pushing them into it. It's the men themselves.
And it's
and I think,
but I want the men to be involved.
If I could just add that actually, if there was shared parental leave, which we've talked about a lot, if men and women both had their time at home with the child, then they could make up their own minds about whether it was for them or not, how it would work in their family. At the moment, they don't have the chance.
It is also around the house what works for each individual couple. And in my own household, my husband happens to be a lot better at doing the yard work, and I am better at organising the birthday party.
You're so forceful. Are you coming to the gentleman back there?
In Britain could do a lot better, I think, with drawing men into childcare and parenthood. But as a father and now a grandfather, I have some experience of trying this myself. There are a couple of obstacles which one should mention. One is that women are far safer than men in nearly all respects. They're safer drivers, they commit less violent crime, and that's reflected in caring relationships, that men who care for children are much more likely to abuse them sexually or physically. That doesn't mean all men, but you look at the statistics, it's true that men are more riskier.
Catherine, you made a face of anguish and pain when our friend said that.
My baby son is 8 months old. And when he was 4 months old, I went back to work full-time. And my husband took additional parental leave for 3 months, which he's just coming to the end of. Less than 1% of couples in the country at the moment do that. And I think partly it's about visibility, that being known about. But when he went to make the request, and he works in a government department, large organisation, when he went to make the request for leave, they'd never heard of it in the HR department. And then they granted it to him, really, and then they granted it to him as though they were doing him a favour. Yeah. And he was very much reassured by everybody that it wouldn't at all affect his position and he would be able to come back in, and they weren't looking adversely at it at all. The sort of culture that I thought was from the 70s that still prevails, even in progressive, clear-thinking organisations. Now, our experience has been, I think my husband has a newfound appreciation for the workplace after 3 months at home, because it is hard work. It is rewarding, but it is hard work. But my baby son, bless him, will come to me and love me, but he will now equally come to my husband, love him, be with him, and we are stronger as a family.
Well, it's better as a result. Cole, you've got I think 4 children?
Yeah,
including triplets?
A 16-year-old and 3 12-years-olds.
3 triplets?
Yes.
My goodness.
What a joy they are.
Yeah, I'm sure they
are.
are.
But they are now.
Hard work.
Yes, and I want to say very clearly that being a father does not emasculate a man. It can be the making of a man, actually.
Absolutely.
There isn't thank you. There isn't a man in the country who can stand up and say, I did enough, without getting attacked, actually, because you can never do enough. And I know full well that certain people will be watching this programme and saying, yeah, because I didn't do enough. But I was caught up in a crisis, particularly when the 3 came, and that forced me to reevaluate how I felt about it and how much I would get involved.
And do you know what? At the end of when our time comes, there's no man who sits there and says, well, I'm glad I didn't spend more time with my children.
No, it's the greatest thing. And I think it's been, you know, if there's anything to make, it's been the making of me. Because, you know, they are fantastic and they have taught me a great deal. It's a terrible struggle sometimes.
I think
for both of us.
Women often...
Any audience? Owen, do you want to make a quick contribution to this?
Well, I just think it's interesting that what it is to be a man isn't static. And the changing role of men has to do a lot, and I don't think you'll like this, but to do with the women's movement and the LGBT movement. It's changed what it's to be a man. Men are more likely now to talk about their feelings, not enough. They're more likely to spend time with their children. They're more likely to have female friends on an equal footing as them, to have gay friends for that matter. And although they're not by any means doing enough around the house, you still, I mean, the number of house husbands has gone up to 10%, so it's increased hugely from a very low base. But what it is to be man has changed for the better, because women, as a movement, and LGBT people have changed what's to be a man, and that's a good thing. That's something to be embraced.
Yep, you say that.
Oh, go on, Alison. Yeah, go on.
You know,
was it you, Alison? I heard a voice from over there.
Can I just make an observation? My cousin and her husband had their first child last night. It was born, a baby girl born last night.
Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations to them all, but the child was born in Norway, where they've both been working for the last couple of years, and so both mother and father are sorting out these huge periods of parental leave, and that is going to change, of course, the first few months of their life and this child's life. And I think that's a very healthy arrangement. But of course,
so there's going to be flexible working at home, is there?
Well, that kind of regulation and state involvement in the laws around that is one thing. But the other side of the argument that Owen was talking about is just being a decent person, being someone who was brought up well to do your fair share, to help out, to be selfless, not selfish. I don't think that requires too many carrots and sticks, apart from when you're raising your children. Just
doing it without being asked. Is that lady there? Yeah. Allow me, lady there. Yes. Good morning. Hello.
I just wanted to say, like, is it Anne? Yeah, I just think it's a bit ludicrous to say it's a threat to masculinity, because you chose to bring a child into this world. If you're not willing to get hands-on and get involved as a woman does, then why put yourself in that situation?
And I do think intentions are good for many people, but it's the behaviour that takes time to catch up. Interesting, the point you made about the historical issue of slavery and this whole long thing. Honestly, it's incredible how behaviour takes a long time to catch up to the good intentions that many men have that I do want to help more.
Is it different in different communities in our very complex society?
Absolutely, because I was going to say that, growing up in the household I grew up in, we had to do everything. My parents had this philosophy that from you can pick up a broom, you learn to sweep. If you can hold a scouring pad, you scour a pot. And you had to learn to do everything, and that's how I've raised my children and my grandchildren.
I've raised my children
because then it doesn't become such an issue. So there may well be government, whatever it is, things that are in the way, so you don't get the paternity leave, etc. But culturally, you're prepared for that. So when it does come, it should be a better society.
Glenn?
I think that's spot on, but I want to pick out one particular point here about the way we've actually framed this question.
We haven't got a lot of time.
Okay, we talked earlier about why is it that black people aren't involved in the Church of England. That's a really good question to ask. It's a really good way to frame it. What is wrong with the institution that has black people not show up equally? We frame this question, what's wrong with men? Why are men shirking? What's the problem with men? Our whole conversation around gender in this country frames conversation around gender by saying men are problems and women have problems. We've got to change that mentality.
So we should have said
sexist
fathers are doing their fair share, aren't they?
No, but you wouldn't say our mothers shirking their fair share. When fathers bring home about two-thirds of the income in families, and they do about the third of the care, we don't say are women not doing their fair share in the workplace. We don't say that, but we say are men doing their fair share.
That's a debate, though, doesn't it?
Of course it does, but we need to go beyond that, Nicky. We need to go beyond that. It gets us started.
The language we use is all important. The phraseology we have is all important. I absolutely take that point. Listen, we're out of time, so thank you all very much for taking part, and give yourselves a round of applause. I think it was a terrifically interesting debate. As always, debates will continue online on Twitter. Next week's special on the First World War. Did it change Britain for the better? Goodbye from the big questions. Have a great Sunday.